what if I told you that the most terrible choice in human history was made not on a battlefield, but in a narrow strait between two rocks? That there are monsters you cannot run from because, escaping from one, you move doomed straight toward the other. Forget everything you knew about sea monsters. Today you'll learn the truth about Scylla and Charybdis, two creatures that turned choice into a curse and a narrow strait into a grave for thousands of ships. Prepare to see the sea not as an element, but as an arena of impossible decisions. Ahead is a story about a six-headed nightmare and a living whirlpool, about the choice between certain death and possible salvation, about how ancient Greeks explained the most terrible thing, the necessity of sacrificing your own for the survival of the rest. Does it seem to you that the Strait of Messina is just a geographical object on a map, a narrow strip of water between two pieces of land that can be sailed through in half an hour? Ancient sailors knew a different truth. For them, this place was where the laws of nature broke, where the sea behaved as if it were alive and evil, where every decision could be the last. Imagine a strip of water just 3 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. On the left, rocky shores of Calabria on the Italian mainland. On the right, the island of Sicily. And between them, the point of collision of two great seas, the Tyrrhenian from the north and the Ionian from the south. When two seas meet in the narrow throat of the strait, something happens that even today makes modern yachtsmen plan their route with special caution. The currents here are not just strong, they're unpredictable. Water from two seas differs in temperature, salinity, and density. And when these masses collide, chaos is born. Imagine a cauldron with boiling water. That's exactly how Odysseus described this place in Homer's Odyssey. Currents in the strait change every 6 hours, 4 times a day, like tides and ebbs in some cursed rhythm. During spring tides, current speed reaches 4 to 5 knots. That's almost 9 kilometers per hour. For a wooden ship with oars and a primitive sail, this was a death sentence. You couldn't row against such current. You couldn't turn around. You were carried where the water wanted, and the only thing you could do was choose which shore to keep to. But that's not even the scariest part. In the narrowest northern part of the strait, between points Punta Pezzo on the mainland and Capo Peloro in Sicily, whirlpools were born. Not metaphorical, but real, rotating funnels capable of pulling a boat underwater. They arose where cold, deep Ionian waters rose up colliding with warm Tyrrhenian waters on the surface. But the creepiest were the sounds. When wind blew in a certain way, when currents collided at certain angles, strange sounds came from the strait, rumbling, howling, roaring. Sounds that echoed off the rocks of Calabria and Sicily, creating the illusion that someone lived under the water. And now add another factor, wind. If wind blew against the current became shorter but stronger. If wind blew in the direction of the current, it lasted longer and became even more powerful. You couldn't predict what would happen. You could only pray. But the ancient Greeks found an explanation for all this chaos. They didn't believe in coincidence. They believed that every element had its will, its face. And for the Strait of Messina, these faces were specific. 2 monsters, 2 guardians, 2 executioners of death sentences. On the rock of the Calabrian shore where now stands the city of Scylla, lived Scylla. In the northern part of the strait, where water boiled and swirled in whirlpools, dwelt Charybdis. And between them was no safe passage. The strait was too narrow, the current too strong, the choice too cruel. That's why the phrase between Scylla and Charybdis survived 3,000 years and reached us. This is not just a metaphor about difficult choice. This is memory of a real place, where thousands of sailors made the choice between 2 kinds of death, and where many of them never returned home. And now meet her personally. Scylla, a name that sailors wouldn't even pronounce aloud, fearing to attract her attention. Homer describes her in the Odyssey with chilling details. 12 legs, crooked, hanging, like tentacles. 6 long necks, snake-like, writhing, capable of reaching a ship's deck from the height of a rock. And 6 heads, each containing 3 rows of sharp teeth, like a shark's. But that's not all. According to some descriptions, her voices resembled the barking of puppies, plaintive, thin, almost innocent sound. Imagine this horror. You hear something like the cry of a newborn animal, and then 6 toothy mouths on long necks fly out of the cave, and in a second, 6 people disappear from your ship. Where exactly did she live? Homer gives precise coordinates, as far as it's possible for a poem written 3,000 years ago. Scylla dwelt in a cave at mid-height of a sheer cliff. The cliff was so smooth and high that even if a person had 20 hands and feet, he couldn't climb it. The cave looked west toward Erebus, the world of darkness and gloom. This is no random detail. Ancient Greeks were masters of symbolism. A cave facing the kingdom of darkness, like a gate between the world of the living and the world of death. Anyone who sailed past risked stepping across this boundary. Above the cave towered the cliff's summit, which was never illuminated by the sun. Even in summer, even at the height of harvest, when the sun stood at zenith, this summit remained in shadow. Constant twilight, constant cold. A place where there is no warmth and light. And now about the scariest thing. Scylla didn't leave her cave. She didn't hunt in the open sea. She didn't pursue ships. She just sat there, in her lair, and waited. Her necks were long enough to reach passing vessels, and she used each of her 6 heads with surgical precision.
One ship equals 6 victims, always. No more, no less. She wasn't greedy. She didn't sink entire ships. She took exactly as much as her 6 mouths could carry. This made her even more terrible. She was predictable in her cruelty. You knew that if you sailed past, 6 people would die. The question was only who exactly. Odysseus, hero who survived the Trojan War, deceived the gods. Even he couldn't do anything against Scylla. Circe warned him, if you try to fight her, if you stop to put on armor and take weapons, she'll attack twice and take 6 more people. The only way to survive? Row faster. Sail past as quickly as possible, give up 6 lives, and move on. No stops, no rescue attempts, only cold calculation of survival. Interestingly, in the modern Italian city of Scylla, located exactly where Scylla supposedly lived, they still show the monster's cave. True, this cave collapsed during an earthquake in the 1780s. Locals joke that this ended her reign of terror over the Strait of Messina. But even if the cave disappeared, memory remained. The city is named in her honor. The rocks still stand. The currents are still dangerous. And the expression, sail past Scylla, still means to pay the inevitable price for continuing the journey. And now the question, where did she come from? Who created this 6-headed embodiment of nightmare? And here begins a story that makes Scylla not just a monster, but a tragedy. Once she was a nymph, beautiful as morning dew on rose petals, so beautiful that any man who saw her instantly fell in love with her. She lived among other sea nymphs, bathed in clear bays, danced on the shore, and didn't know what suffering was. But beauty in Greek mythology is not a blessing, it's a curse. There are several versions of how the transformation happened, but all are based on one thing: jealousy. And what's most cruel, Scylla did nothing wrong. She was a victim of someone else's envy, someone else's anger, someone else's love. Here's the first version, described by Ovid in Metamorphoses.
There was a sea god named Glaucus, half human, half fish, with green skin covered with seaweed. Once he was a simple fisherman, but he ate magic grass and turned into a sea deity. And so this Glaucus saw Scylla and fell in love at first sight. He swam up to her, tried to talk, tried to charm, but Scylla was repulsed by his appearance. Scales, fins, strange green hair of seaweed, all this frightened her. She fled to a rocky cape where he couldn't reach her. Glaucus was desperate. He went to Circe, a powerful enchantress, daughter of the sun god Helios, who lived on the island of Aea and was famous for her potions and magic. Glaucus asked her to prepare a love potion that would make Scylla love him. But there was a problem. Circe herself fell in love with Glaucus. Imagine this scene. A powerful enchantress, daughter of the sun itself, offers her love to a sea god. She tells him, "Forget this nymph. Take me. I'll give you power you can't even imagine." But Glaucus refuses. He tells her, "Trees will grow on the sea bottom and seaweed on mountain peaks sooner than my love for Scylla will cool." This was a catastrophic mistake. Circe is not one who forgives refusals. She couldn't kill Glaucus. He was a god. She couldn't make him love her. That was beyond her magic. But she could destroy Scylla. The sorceress prepared a potion, not a love potion, but a poison of transformation. She went to the bay where Scylla usually bathed and poured the poison into the water. Then she left and waited. When Scylla descended into the water to bathe, as she had done 1,000 times before, the transformation began. When Scylla descended into the water, transformation began. Her body changed. From a beautiful nymph, she turned into a monster with 6 heads and 12 tentacles. And the most terrible thing, she remained conscious. She remembered who she was. She remembered what it was like to be beautiful. She knew what happened, and she saw her reflection in the water.
Imagine this nightmare. You look into the water and see a monster, and then you realize the monster is you. Ovid writes that Scylla tried to run from herself, but how do you run from your own body? She rushed along the shore, tried to tear off the dogheads, but they were part of her. She screamed, but her voice turned into terrible barking. Eventually, she found a cave in the rock and hid there, from the world, from herself, from memories of who she was. Glaucus, seeing what happened to his beloved, was horrified. He begged Circe to reverse the curse, but the sorceress refused. Moreover, according to some versions, Glaucus was so shocked by the transformation that he left Scylla and chose another nymph. Not Circe. He still rejected her, just another beautiful nymph. And Circe? She was tormented by guilt. According to some versions, she herself came to the gods and confessed her crime, asking for punishment. She was exiled to an island where she had to live in solitude. But this didn't return in Scylla's former appearance. According to another version, Scylla was turned into a monster by Amphitrite, Poseidon's wife, jealous of her beauty. The result was the same. An innocent nymph became a monster because of someone else's jealousy. Thus, Scylla became a symbol not just of a monster, but of a victim of divine cruelty. She didn't ask for power, didn't want revenge. She was simply too beautiful in a world where beauty attracted not love, but curses. And now, when you know this story, think, who here is the real monster? The 6-headed creature in the cave? Or the gods and sorceresses who turned an innocent girl into a death machine out of jealousy? If Scylla was visible horror, 6 heads barking from a cave, then Charybdis was invisible horror, and this made her even more frightening. Charybdis was not a monster in the usual sense. She had no body, paws, wings, or scales.
She was a giant mouth stretched on the sea bottom beneath the water's surface. A mouth so huge it could swallow an entire ship in one gulp. Homer describes her thus: divine Charybdis sucks in black water. 3 times a day she swallowed the sea. Huge volumes of water were drawn into her womb, creating a whirlpool of incredible force. And then, with the same monstrous pressure, she spewed the water back like a geyser, throwing it to the height of rocks. Imagine this scene. Water suddenly begins to swirl, first slowly, almost imperceptibly, then faster and faster, until the entire strait turns into a giant rotating funnel. The ship is sucked toward the center of the whirlpool, where gapes the black mouth of Charybdis, ready to swallow the vessel whole, with people, cargo, masts. And then, a few hours later, when you think the danger has passed, the water begins to boil. It rises, bubbles, as if in a giant cauldron over fire. Spray flies so high it reaches the tops of rocks on both sides of the strait. And everything that was swallowed, shipwreckage, sailors' bodies, pieces of wood, is thrown back out, smashing against stones. The ancient Greek geographer Strabo wrote that wreckage of ships swallowed by Charybdis was carried by current to the shore of Tauromenium, modern Taormina in Sicily, and this shore was called Copria, which means dump, because there accumulated the remains of everything Charybdis swallowed and spat out. But who was she? Where did this living abyss come from? According to the most widespread version, Charybdis was the daughter of Poseidon and Gaia, god of the sea and goddess of earth. She was a nymph, beautiful and devoted to her father. And when Poseidon waged endless war with his brother Zeus for control over coastal lands, Charybdis helped her father. Her work was simple and deadly. After Poseidon raised a storm, Charybdis directed waves toward shore. She flooded villages, swallowed fields, drowned forests, taking lands from Zeus and giving them to the sea. Entire islands disappeared underwater. Coastlines turned into seabed.
She was Poseidon's weapon in the war of gods, and she was too effective. Zeus, king of gods, seeing how many lands she took from him, flew into rage. He couldn't forgive that a simple nymph, daughter of his younger brother, dared steal territories from him, and he punished her the way only a tyrant god could punish. Zeus hurled lightning at Charybdis and cast her down to the bottom of the Strait of Messina. But he didn't just kill her, he transformed her into a monster. Zeus chained her to the seabed. There, in the depths, she was doomed to remain forever, unable to rise, unable to flee. And he cursed her with insatiable thirst. Imagine this horror. You're sentenced to drink the sea forever, without stopping. Your thirst will never be quenched. You swallow tons of water, but it brings no relief. You're forced to drink again and again and again. 3 times a day, every day, forever. Homer called her divine, not in the sense of greatness, but in the sense of her supernatural nature. She was no longer a nymph. She became the embodiment of whirlpool, a living catastrophe. Some myths say Charybdis controlled tides. When she sucked in water, the sea retreated, low tide. When she spewed it back, the sea advanced, high tide. 3 times a day she created this cycle, the breathing of the sea, controlled by a cursed monster. But here's what's interesting. Unlike Scylla, who was often depicted as a monster with a body, Charybdis remained invisible to the eye. You didn't see her. You only saw the consequences of her existence: the whirlpool, boiling water, the sucking funnel. Homer wrote, "When she spews water, she bubbles and boils in all her depth, like a cauldron on a huge fire, and spray falls on the tops of both rocks." This is not a description of a monster. This is a description of a natural catastrophe that became alive. In later depictions, Charybdis was sometimes drawn as a huge snake with a round mouth surrounded by tentacles. But even then, artists couldn't give her a concrete form. She was too abstract, too connected with the very element of the sea to have a fixed appearance. And above Charybdis, according to Homer, grew a fig tree, the only living tree amid rocks and water. It will become critically important later when Odysseus returns to Charybdis a second time, but more on that shortly. The creepiest thing about Charybdis is her predictability. Scylla could attack at any moment when a ship sailed past, but Charybdis acted on schedule, 3 times a day, every day, from millennia. If you knew this schedule, if you could calculate the time, maybe you had a chance. Maybe. But if you miscalculated by even a few minutes, if you entered the strait at the moment when Charybdis began to drink, it was all over. Circe warned Odysseus, "Pray not to be there when she sucks in water. Even Poseidon himself cannot save you from death." Even the god of the sea is powerless against the whirlpool created by his own daughter, cursed by Zeus. And here's what's truly scary. Unlike Scylla, who took 6, Charybdis took everyone. The whole ship, the entire crew, without discrimination, without remainder. Everything disappeared into the black abyss and then was spat out as wreckage on the shore of the dump. Thus, Charybdis became a symbol not just of danger, but of inevitability. Scylla could be seen, and, at least in theory, one could try to avoid her. But Charybdis? Charybdis was a force of nature turned into an instrument of divine vengeance, and against her there was no defense. Imagine you're Odysseus, hero of the Trojan War, a man who deceived gods, defeated a cyclops, survived storms and encounters with monsters, and here before you is a choice with no right answer. Circe, the sorceress who saved you from the island of Aea, gives you instructions on how to return home. She says, after you sail past the sirens, you'll have 2 paths. The first path, through the wandering rocks, Plunkty, where rocks move and collide, smashing ships to splinters. Only one ship in history could pass there, the Argo, on which Jason and the Argonauts sailed, and only because Hera herself, Zeus's wife, intervened and protected them. Without divine help, your chances are 0. The second path, through the Strait of Messina, where Scylla and Charybdis live. And here Circe tells you a truth that makes blood run cold. Choose Scylla, better to lose 6 men than all. Odysseus tries to argue. He's a hero. He's not used to surrendering without a fight. He asks Circe, "Can I avoid Charybdis and simultaneously fight Scylla?" And here's what Circe answers, and these words are a sentence. Scylla is not mortal. She is immortal evil, terror, and destruction. You cannot fight her. There is no defense. The only way out is flight. Odysseus
chooses Scylla. Because mathematics is cruel. 6 deaths versus the entire ship. This is not heroism. This is survival calculation. But he makes another decision. Odysseus's pride doesn't allow him to simply sail past. He decides not to tell the crew about Scylla. He wants them to focus on rowing, avoiding Charybdis, while he himself prepares for battle. Odysseus puts on armor, takes 2 spears, stands on deck ready to fight the 6-headed monster. This was a catastrophic mistake. When the ship enters the strait, the crew sees Charybdis. They hear the rumble of water, see smoke and spray rising to the sky. Water boils and bubbles like in a huge cauldron. They see the black bottom of the strait. So deeply does Charybdis suck in water. All rowers freeze, staring at the whirlpool. Oars fall from hands. The ship loses speed. They're paralyzed with horror. And precisely at this moment, Scylla attacks. 6 long necks fly out of the cave. In a second, 6 people disappear from the ship. Odysseus hears their screams, but can do nothing.
Odysseus says later, this was the most pitiful scene he saw in his entire journey. Worse than the Cyclops, worse than the sirens, worse than everything he experienced. Because he chose this death. He knew this would happen. Scylla dragged 6 into her cave. They screamed, stretched out their hands to Odysseus, begged for help. But he ordered to row on, because stopping would mean death for the rest. The ship sails past. The crew is in shock. 6 people dead, but the rest alive. This was Odysseus's first choice. But the story didn't end there. Odysseus will return to Charybdis. After the crew landed on the island of the sun, Helios, and violated the ban, ate the gods' sacred cows, Zeus punished them all. He sent a storm, destroyed the ship, and all the people drowned. All except Odysseus. Odysseus clung to the wreckage of the mast and keel, tied together. Current carried him back, straight to Charybdis. Imagine his horror. He's alone, without a ship, without a crew, and water around him begins to rotate. Charybdis began to suck in water. The ship's wreckage on which he was floating was sucked into the whirlpool. Odysseus sees them disappear into the black mouth. But above the whirlpool grew a fig tree, that very tree Circe spoke of. Odysseus jumped and grabbed a branch. He hung there like a bat, holding on to the tree's branches, above the abyss where Charybdis swallowed the sea. Below him, a black mouth sucking in tons of water. Around, the rumble and roar of the whirlpool. Homer writes that Odysseus couldn't stand with feet on the rock nor pull himself up on branches. They were too high and far from the stone. He just hung there for hours. He waited for Charybdis to spit out the ship's wreckage back, because the cycle was predictable. She swallows, then spews out. And so finally, when the sun was already setting, Charybdis spit the water back. The wreckage of mast and keel surfaced. Odysseus released the branch and fell into the water next to the wreckage, grabbed onto them, and rowed with all his might, praying that Charybdis wouldn't begin a new cycle. He survived, alone, of the entire crew. Thus, Odysseus became the only person who twice encountered Charybdis and survived. The first time by paying Scylla with 6 lives. The second time by clinging to a fig tree and waiting, hanging above the abyss until the monster spat out his ship's wreckage. But here's the question that tormented him for the rest of his life. Did he make the right choice? 6 people died because he chose Scylla, But if he had chosen Charybdis, all might have died. On the other hand, if he had listened to Circe and not tried to fight, maybe he would have seen Scylla earlier, maybe saved at least one of the 6. This is the real horror of the choice between Scylla and Charybdis. There is no right answer. There is only the lesser evil. And even having chosen it, you will remember the faces of those you sacrificed. Odysseus returned home, but 6 of his comrades remained in the 6-headed monster's cave. Their screams echoed in his dreams until the end of his life. And when today we say, "I'm between Scylla and Charybdis," we repeat Odysseus's choice, a choice where victory means loss, where salvation requires sacrifice, where there's no place for heroism, only cold calculation of survival. And now let's talk about why this story has survived 3,000 years, why we still say between Scylla and Charybdis, though most people don't even know who these monsters are. Because this is not just a myth about sea monsters. This is a myth about the very nature of choice. The expression between Scylla and Charybdis has entered practically all languages of the world. In English, they say between Scylla and Charybdis, but also use analogies like between a rock and the hard place, or between the devil and the deep blue sea. All these phrases mean one thing: a situation where every option leads to catastrophe, where there's no right answer, where choice is not between good and evil, but between 2 kinds of evil. But why specifically Scylla and Charybdis became the symbol of this? Why not other monsters, not other dangers? The answer lies in the geometry of the myth itself.
The Strait of Messina was so narrow, it was impossible to avoid both monsters simultaneously. The distance between Scylla and Charybdis Homer describes as an arrow's shot, approximately 3 kilometers. For an ancient ship with oars, this was critical distance. You couldn't sail in the middle. The current was too strong. It carried you toward one of the shores. You couldn't turn around. The passage behind you had already closed. You couldn't accelerate. There weren't enough oars for that. You could only choose which shore to go to Scylla or to Charybdis. And here's what makes this dilemma philosophically unique. It's not a choice between bad and good. It's a choice between guaranteed loss and possible annihilation. Scylla always took 6 people. This was predictable. You knew the price: 6 lives. No more, no less. This was terrible, but it was definite. Charybdis might spare you if you calculated time correctly. But if you miscalculated by even a few minutes, if you got there when she swallows water, everyone dies. The entire ship, the whole crew, no exceptions. So what to choose? Certain sacrifice or possible salvation with risk of complete annihilation? Circe gave Odysseus advice: choose the lesser evil. But it's easy to say when you're a sorceress on a distant island. Try to make this choice when you're standing on deck, when your comrades row beside you, when you must decide who of them will die. Philosophers call this a moral dilemma, a situation where any action violates some moral principle, where it's impossible to exit the situation without guilt. Odysseus chose Scylla and lost 6 people. He's guilty of their deaths. He knew they would die and still led the ship past the cave. But if he had chosen Charybdis and lost everyone, he would have been even more guilty. This is the real horror of the dilemma. There's no way out without guilt. Interestingly, the expression between Scylla and Charybdis came to be used not only in everyday situations, but also in serious contexts. Politicians speak of it when they need to choose between two catastrophic courses of action. Economists when describing crises where any decision leads to recession. Doctors when discussing choice between risky surgery and patient's slow death. But what's truly frightening in this myth, ancient Greeks didn't believe one could avoid such a choice. In their worldview, the Moirai, 3 goddesses of fate, had already woven the thread of your life. If you're fated to find yourself between Scylla and Charybdis, you will find yourself there. The question is not how to avoid, but how to survive. Modern psychology also studies how people behave in such situations. Research shows that when choice is equally bad in both directions, people often freeze, fall into a state of decision paralysis. This is exactly what happened to Odysseus's crew when they saw Charybdis. They stopped rowing, oars fell from hands, and precisely at this moment, Scylla attacked. Perhaps the main lesson of the myth is that in a situation between Scylla and Charybdis, the worst decision is the absence of decision.
Odysseus made his choice to pick the lesser evil and sacrifice 6 instead of everyone. He survived, but carried the burden of guilt for life. He managed to return home, while those who freeze in indecision often perish without making a step. When we say, "I'm between Scylla and Charybdis," we acknowledge the ancient truth. Sometimes there are no good solutions, only the price you're willing to pay. 6 or all. Certain loss or risk of losing everyone. Guilt for action or for inaction. That's why this myth still lives. Such dilemmas didn't disappear. They're always with us as long as there's a need to choose between 2 threats. Let's ask, why did Greeks, skilled and bold sailors, turn an ordinary strait into a kingdom of monsters? The answer is simple and surprising. The Strait of Messina was truly one of the most dangerous places of the time, and the frightening natural phenomena there defied rational explanation. So they turned them into living beings. Scientific data only increased the impact of the myth. Greeks weren't exaggerating the dangers, they just gave real catastrophes monstrous features. Scylla with her whirlpools is a real phenomenon. 2 seas meet in the Strait of Messina. Waters of different densities create powerful currents and turbulence. All of this leads to deadly whirlpools. Even today, sailors sometimes hear strange sounds of water explained by the natural conditions. The myth of Charybdis, who 3 times a day swallows the sea and spews it out, actually describes the alternation of tides and currents. Scylla's image arose from a combination of several dangers: rocks, storm waves, and strong currents. All these the ancient sailors brought together in one monster figure. Even more striking, the strait remains dangerous today. Despite modern technology, the risks of collisions and disasters are high, and that's why a special vessel traffic service was created. Scylla and Charybdis aren't just ancient monsters from a school textbook, but a vivid metaphor. Life forces you to sacrifice something for survival, to make tough choices and be prepared to live with their consequences. Everyone has faced a situation where every choice involves loss, between family and career, happiness and duty, dream and stability. We all step into Odysseus's shoes, seeing 2 paths ahead, each with sacrifices, with no guarantee that we'll stay the same after passing the test. The real monster here turns out to be the nature of the world itself, where impossible choices aren't the exception, but the rule, where saving some inevitably means losing others. Ancient Greeks didn't promise a happy ending or embellish reality, but simply told of a man who'd made his choice, accepted responsibility, and kept rowing,
because there was no other way. The point of this myth is that it never grows old. Human nature hasn't changed, and no one is immune from situations where all options hurt. Politicians balance between economy and ecology, doctors between risk and suffering, parents between protecting children and allowing them freedom to make mistakes. Next time you find only a choice between two evils, remember Odysseus. He wasn't a perfect hero, didn't find an ideal solution or save everyone, but he made a choice and kept going. Between Scylla and Charybdis, there's only one way to survive. Accept inevitable losses and keep moving forward, even when everything around turns into a whirlpool of chaos. Have you ever been in situations where every option seemed bad? How did you cope, and how do you live with the result? Leave a comment. I'm genuinely interested in your experience. If you enjoyed this look into ancient myths and the philosophy of tough choices, get ready for more stories. Like and subscribe to the channel. Many more examples lie ahead showing how to be human in a world without easy answers. Thank you for sharing this journey with me.